Hello and welcome to Voices of the Prophets, class number 10. I am Rabbi Rafi Mallet, everybody's Rabbi. This class is brought to you by the Seattle Kollel, seattlekollel.com, SeattleKollel.com, bringing educational Jewish content and programming to the Seattle Jewish community. Visit their website. Consider making a tax-deductible donation. Other ways you can support this channel: become a channel member. Your small monthly membership fee collectively does a lot to make these classes possible. If you'd like to make a more meaningful donation, you can use the donate links in the description below. In addition, you can shop at artscroll.com for the world's greatest Judaica products using my affiliate link, artscroll.com/Rebbe Rafi, REBBI RAFI. We have in the studio Abigail, Sandy Bassey, Cliff. We have in the YouTube live stream Liz, B'nai Noach Hearts for Hashem, Tom Averna. Tom, it's great to see you. Colin Martin, Lisa or Liza Sparks. Not sure how to say that. And Tom says, interesting new background. Yes, I was just saying, I've been playing with some AI tools. So I went to Google Gemini and I said, please generate a dramatic image depicting Ovadyah verse 12. And this is what it gave me. So I said, you know what? I'm going to change up the background for funsies. This is part of the YouTube thumbnail image, but also I made it my green screen background. So a little creepy. Yeah, it'll turn up the drama of the content of the verse or verses we're going to see tonight. And give me your feedback. If you like when I change up the background, I'll try a few different things. If you prefer just the plain logo in the background, whatever, we'll hear your feedback. Got my 12-month perk. Boy, how time flies when you're having fun. What's a 12-month perk? Is that like what is that? Tell me what that is. Hello, Rabbi. Shalom to everyone. This Tim McMullen is here. Tom loves the background, so that's good. Abigail likes the background. Other announcements. I'd like to shout out our members. You deserve a shout out for supporting the channel. So I'm going to call out your name. Thank you to Liza or Lisa Sparks, Devorah Incarnation, 23rd Street, Dawn McD, Scotty Helton, Ben, Liz, Randy G, Linda Hill, Mound of Venus, Mercedes Raquel, Will and Indy, Monique Letourneau, Dr. D2U, Sean Watson, Paul Winder, B'nai Noach Hearts for Hashem, John Volkoff, Thomas Jefferson, Tim McMullen, Colin Martin, Nancy Lynn Bat Noach, Guella, Rhonda Rains, Alicia Douglas, 92 Vanguard, Abigail Foster, Common Man Homestead 2016, Fadarecci. Once again, thank you to Jacob Fadarecci for allowing me to use his StreamYard account. And everyone should check out his channel, which is called Fadarecci, FATURECHI. Check it out. T. Bishop, Anthony S. Boris, Susan Walbrandt, Elena Yoon, Tom Averna, who's here tonight. Some of you, we've seen you already in the live stream, in the comments, or in the studio. Janice Brandon, Zachary, Sandy Bassey, who's with us in the studio, Tim Flanagan, Clifford Cohen, who's with us in the studio, Erica E., and David Ivans. We're up to 42 members, so thank you all for supporting the channel. Other announcements tonight as follows. If you'd like to join my mailing list, please email me, rabbi@rabbirafimallet.com. If you'd like to communicate with me, you can email me, but the best way is to contact me over WhatsApp, which we can exchange WhatsApp contacts in an email because I can respond more promptly to those messages. Tonight's class is dedicated in memory of Sarah Brana Bas Avraham, whose yard site is tonight, and that is the mother of a friend. In addition to dedicated to my father, Yisrael Tuvia ben Eliezer, whose yard site is this week. A yard site is the anniversary, the Hebrew anniversary of the day they passed away. And that's this week on the 12th of Nisan. Today's April 6th, which is actually the English anniversary of the day my father passed away. But today was the 8th of Nisan. Tonight begins the 9th of Nisan. And my father's yard site will be this week on the 12th. Let me finish the dedications and I'll say another word about that. I would also like to dedicate tonight's class for a refuah shlema, a complete healing for Anina Malka bas Hila Hinda, Ariel David ben Anina Malka, Nachman Shlomo ben Rachel Bashya, Moshe ben Razel, that's the Kal of a Rebbe, for those who know who he is, very holy man, who I've met on a couple of occasions, just an astounding personality. He's very elderly, he's not well. Hashem should give him a refuah shalema immediately. And Samara Rose Bas Deborah. Sorry, I don't have a Hebrew name for her. And I was going to say something. Oh, so as regarding my father's yard site, every year I've been studying Mishnah. Mishnah is essentially a very important component of the oral law, and it's divided into 6 parts, the 6 Sidarim of the Mishnah. Each one is called a Seder. And since my father passed away, I've taken on to study an entire Seder. It's quite a lot over the course of a year, so that I'm finishing the 5th Seder this year in his memory. And I wanted to do something on my channel to commemorate that, because I also dedicated the learning to some other people's loved ones who passed away, or friends that I know who passed away. And I want to acknowledge them, particularly Sarah Bana Bas Avraham, who we said her yard site is tonight. So I've been learning Mishnah in her memory as well. And so I would like to do the completion ceremony, where I will say the ending section of the Mishnah, followed by a certain formula, which kind of highlights the importance of this type of learning. It's called the Hadron. I want to do that online on my channel, God willing, tomorrow night. The rest of my week is going to be hectic. Tuesday, half of my family is traveling for the holiday. Wednesday, I'm traveling with the rest of my family for the holiday. We're all going to meet up in sunny Florida, but it's going to be a busy week, and Passover is coming right away. God willing, there will be a Tuesday night class. The Tuesday night class on Bereshit, Genesis, will, God willing, go on. I'm going to drop my family off at the airport, and I'll be home in time to give the class, I hope. Okay, so those are some of the important announcements I want to make. So just look out for an email and other social media posts, WhatsApp, about tomorrow night's Siyum and then Tuesday's class. So basically, my week is very full this week. Okay, and those are all the announcements I want to make. Oh, there's a 12-month perk color for being a member. Oh, when you're a member for 12 months, you get a special color. That's really awesome. Oh, Golan Mike is here. Mike Golan, my chavrusa, my learning partner. We learn once a week together, and it's a very big privilege for me. And I'm so honored that he's here joining the live stream of the class. Will and Indy says it's a scary background, but it's cool. Mercedes Raquel is here. T. Bishop says, I'm going to pretend my perpetual encouragement to pair images with Hebrew text contribution to the decision. Okay, if you want to take credit. Someone's saying there's sound and visual issues. Sound and visual issues. How bad is it?
There's some sound, background sound, which is messing up your sound, and your visual just keeps jumping and stopping. And
okay,
is there a mic open somewhere?
I don't see anyone's mic open, and it could It could be on my end, it could be my connection. Is it still going on?
Not right at the moment.
Okay. I'm sort of wondering, other people are saying it's good on their end. Ooh, Seekers of Righteousness is here. This series has been so eye-opening. Oh, nice to have you, Seekers of Righteousness. Liza says she's not having an issue. T. Bishop says his sound and picture are fine. It might be on your end, Abigail.
It's not you, it's me.
B'nai Noach Hearts for Hashem says good here. Tim McMullen, good here. Okay. But people want to start learning, so let's go. I'm going to put the text up. How do I do that? I do this. One of these. Is it this? It's this. Here we go. Okay, we're up to verse 12, but I do want to review. Some people are new in the class this evening, so we're just going to do a quick review. We're learning the Book of Ovadyah. It's one of the so-called minor prophets. It's one chapter. The whole book is one chapter, and the topic of the book is the downfall of Edom. Now, Edom was a nation in the Tanakh, in the Bible, who descends from Esau, the brother of Jacob, and they were antagonistic toward the people of Israel pretty much always. And there were some brief alliances, but the prophet prophesies their downfall. And as a question, is it talking about the biblical nation of Edom, or is it talking about another nation that took on the identity of Edom? And the consensus of the commentaries is it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both, but primarily Edom, the identity of Edom was passed from this small people that lived south of the land of Israel to what became the Roman Empire and ultimately the Western Christian civilization, because we said that it was Edomites, it was descendants of the people of Edom, descendants of Esau, who migrated to Italy and started the Roman Empire. And even though the majority of the subjects of the Roman Empire were not Edomites by descent, but the Roman Empire was started by and ruled by Edomites, and therefore the legacy of Edom became conferred onto this empire, which became the greatest antagonist to the Jewish people in the history of the world, essentially. And again, that's the Roman Empire followed by Christian civilization in general. Okay. Now I'm concerned that maybe this wire, I keep touching the wire of my microphone. I wonder if when I touch it, it disrupts it. So I'm going to try to avoid doing that. Okay, so what we spoke about in last week's class and the class, so the first section of the book deals with the ascent, first the ascent of this empire, and then its eventual downfall. And the section we're in now deals with what is the cause of this downfall. There's sort of the immediate cause, and there's the ultimate cause. We talked about some circumstances surrounding its destruction. And then we said it's as a result of their antagonism toward Jacob, toward Israel. And so last week we read this verse 11, which said, on the day that you stood opposite, on the day that strangers carried away his substance and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots upon Jerusalem, also you were as one of them, which we said refers both to the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians, where the Edomites, these are the ancient Edomites of the Bible, kind of came and cheered on the destruction. They were somewhat not just complacent, but complicit. And then later, the Roman Empire itself, which becomes identified as Edom, comes and destroys the second temple. And we even related it to current events now with the current onslaught against Israel and the Jewish people, where much of the Christian world, much of the Western world, either stands by complacently, like it says here, the day that you stood opposite, they stand complacently and they don't aid, but they also criticize Israel. And in many places, they're cheering on the enemies of Israel to destroy Israel. So there's a lot of parallels between the first temple destruction, the second temple destruction, and our current conflict, which are all reasons to heap guilt upon Edom, which will lead to their ultimate destruction. And we spent a lot of time talking about different possibilities of who can be identified as Edom today, but we won't rehash all of that immediately. We'll continue with the preceding verses and then the proceeding verses, and then we will discuss their meaning. Okay? Before we begin, any questions or comments? Okay? Remember, you're allowed to interrupt at any time if you're in the studio, and you can make comments in the YouTube chat, which I will look at from time to time.
I have a question left over from last week about Chayil.
Yeah.
Exodus 18, verse 21. Your translation said capable men, which you discussed as being having the physical talent. The translation that I'm most used to is men of substance, which I've always thought, especially in context, would meant more men of moral substance. Is there any substance in that? See what I did there? Or is it in context? Does it, you know what I'm trying to say? Is it more physical or is it moral?
Okay, so I think that I think the translation is flexible. And if we were examining that verse and the different commentaries on that verse, we would likely find different meanings offered for the word chayil over there. I think that what you're saying can be tolerated in the word. Like what we saw in the Ramban was that chayil means sort of like a large group of something. So it could be a chayil of moral character, right? A strength. That's why it's often translated as strength, right? Because strength is like sort of a mass or a buildup of physicality, right? So it could be a mass of physical strength, moral strength. I think it's flexible enough to tolerate that. I think it could also mean physical substance, as in wealth. And I believe that judges were supposed to be wealthy so that they would not be swayed by a bribe. In other words, they wouldn't be financially needy in such a way that someone could offer them a bribe and be attracted to it because they should have whatever they need and not be tempted by a bribe. So I think there are many different potential meanings for chayil, and I wouldn't rule out what you said.
Thank you.
Okay. Liz says prophecy can simultaneously apply past, present, and future. I believe that is the case. I believe a prophecy can simultaneously refer to more than one period, as I think we've seen in this text, and we will, I think, continue to see. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I think that is somewhat self-evident. Okay, so here is the verse. I'll read it in Hebrew, and we will grapple with this translation a little bit. Okay, it says as follows. Here, let me do the laser pointer thing. It's more fun. Here. Ve'al teire v'yom achicha b'yom nochro ve'al tismach livnei Yehuda b'yom ovdom ve'al tagdel picha b'yom tzara. So the first part, ve'al teire v'yom achicha b'yom nochro. Al teire means do not see, you shall not see b'yom achicha, on the day of your brother. You shall not see on the day of your brother, b'yom nochro, on the day of his becoming nechar. Nechar means foreign. Okay, b'yom nochro. What did I write here? On the day of his estrangement, on the day that he became a foreigner. So you should not see on the day of your brother, on the day that he became a foreigner. We'll talk about what that means shortly. Ve'al tismach livnei Yehuda b'yom ovdam, and do not rejoice, samach, simcha, joy, right? And do not rejoice, livnei Yehuda, over the children of Judah, b'yom ovdam, on the day they are avad. Those who are in the biblical Hebrew class know this means to go lost. On the day they were made to go lost. Here, I used someone's translation on the day of their ruin. It's an acceptable translation because to go lost could also be synonymous with being destroyed or ruined. So it's an acceptable translation, but could also be on the day that they went lost, were made to go lost. Va'al tagdel picha, and do not tagdel. You could see the root of this word is gadol, meaning to be enlarged, to be big, large. Do not enlarge picha, your mouth. Do not enlarge your mouth b'yom tzara, on the day of tzara, on the day of sorrow, trouble, woe. Here the translator said anguish. I use this translation. It's acceptable. Anguish, sorrow, trouble. It's all the same idea. Do not open your mouth wide, right? Al tagdel picha. Do not enlarge your mouth. So number one, do not see your brother on the day of his estrangement. Any questions on the translation? Any questions on how I translated that? Okay, feel free to speak up. I'll look at your comments if you type it in. So don't see your brother on the day of his estrangement. So what's the day of his estrangement? What does that mean? What do you think that means? The day of his estrangement is the day he was exiled, the day he was made a stranger in his own land, so to speak. In other words, he was estranged from his land. He was dispossessed of his land. So he was made a foreigner vis-a-vis his own land. And he was displaced into a foreign country where he was a foreigner. So the exile is Israel becoming a foreigner. That's the day of his estrangement. You should not see. So what did we see? We already saw that Edom stood by. That's what we saw in the previous verse. What did we say? On the day that you stood opposite, on the day that you stand opposite, that was the first exile by the Babylonians, where the Edomites stood by and watched as the Jews were taken into captivity and destroyed by the Babylonians. Okay, so you shouldn't see, you shouldn't stand by and watch. It's not appropriate on the day of his estrangement. Okay, and do not rejoice over the sons of Judah, the children of Judah, on the day that they went lost. So it wasn't enough that you watched. In other words, there's three crimes that are being described here. Number one, you watched. It's not your place to see. When someone else is being put through shame and torture, it's humiliating for others to see them in their degradation. So at least turn away. When a person is degraded, the last thing they want is people to see them in their degradation. So it was bad enough they were degraded by the Babylonians, but you went and you gawked at them. So that was inappropriate thing, number one. Number two, it wasn't enough that you saw and they were humiliated by you watching, but you rejoiced over it. You were happy over it. Like sometimes you see a disturbing sight, you see someone being degraded, and you know, first of all, you have an instinct to turn away. If you're a decent person, like you don't want to look. Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. Right? But even if you're going to look, you're disturbed by it. You're hurt by it. What I'm seeing is just so awful and tragic. No, they watched the Jews being destroyed and they rejoiced. So they're rejoicing over what they saw was crime number two, and a worse crime. And then finally, that they opened their mouth against them, as we saw. What did we see? We saw this last time in Psalms 137, verse 7. Remember Hashem for the sons of Edom, meaning remember against the sons of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, who were saying, Aru, Aru, ad ha-yesod ba, raise it until its foundation. They were cheering on the Babylonians to destroy the Jews in Jerusalem. They opened their mouth wide. So these are the three crimes. They watched, they rejoiced, and they cheered on. They opened their mouth wide. I'm going the wrong way. Got to go back to verse 12. Okay, that's verse 12. Any questions on that? Sandy says, well, if any, first in the studio, any questions in the studio?
Not a question, but it's just so current, sadly.
Yes, 100%, 100% current. This is everything we're watching go on with the atrocities that were committed on October 7th, and it was live streamed on social media, and people watched, people rejoiced, and people openly called for more. T. Bishop says, it reminds me of the scene where Ham looks upon his father's disgrace and mocks him. A very good analogy of where looking upon someone's degradation is seen as wrong, perverse, and criminal. Sandy says, when I looked up the verse earlier in the Bible Hub, see was translated gloat. It was confusing to me, the connection there. Okay, that's interesting. It doesn't mean gloat. It doesn't mean that. Maybe they're interpreting it euphemistically, like what kind of seeing are they doing? In other words, maybe the translators, what's wrong with seeing? Obviously, the seeing came with some type of a mocking, right? But it doesn't mean that. Does not directly translate that way. Seekers of anyway, Bible Hub is not a source that I would really rely upon. Seekers of righteousness, will that apply to those who watch the Hamas footage of their atrocities on October 7th? So we just addressed that, and I think the answer is unequivocally yes. Liz says, my grandpa. What are you saying about that? Maybe you could elaborate what you're referring to. Okay. Let's go on. Unless there's any other comments, I'm going to go on. So here, very interesting. Here is the Targum. The Targum is the Aramaic translation. The Targum on the prophets was written by, as it's here at the top of the slide, Yonatan ben Uziel, who was a very, very significant sage in the First Temple period. The First Century, which is the Second Temple period. He was a disciple of Hillel. For those who know who Hillel is, it was extremely significant, one of the most significant personalities of the Second Temple period. And it says that Hillel had 80 disciples, and the greatest one of them was Yonatan ben Uziel. And it says about him that when he would be engaged in Torah study, and a bird would fly over his head, the bird would burst into flame. Such was the power of his Torah study that it incinerated birds flying over him as he was studying. Now, we can interpret that metaphorically, euphemistically, figuratively, but it's a powerful statement. There's more to say about Yonatan ben Uziel, but in any case, he wrote a translation of the prophets. And in his translation of this verse, whereas the verse says, do not look upon, Judah in his day of anguish, as it were. Here it writes it differently. Vidachazeta v'yoma de'achuch. And that, which means, and that you did see in the day of your brother. In other words, you shall not see, he translates as you did see, meaning it's not a commandment of you shall not see. It's more like you should not have done this, and yet you did. So he puts it in the positive, like when it says you shall not means you should not have, but you did. So that's how he writes it. You did do this. This is what you did. This is why you're guilty. Remember, this section deals with the guilt of Edom and why he's deserving of destruction. It's because you did look at your brother on the day of, it says the day of his destruction. What was the word in the Hebrew? B'yom nochro, on the day of his estrangement. Now, I have to be transparent to tell you, not everyone translates nochro as estrangement. I'm translating it according to at least 2 commentaries that I saw that base it on the word nechar. There are other commentaries, including Rashi, who relate this word to a different Hebrew root, and that really means to like entrap or enclose. So either way, it doesn't directly translate as destruction, but you'll see that he uses the word destruction over and over because all of this, at least to the translator, was synonymous to the day of Judah's destruction, and it just picking kind of different descriptive words of aspects of that destruction, right? That they were exiled, they were estranged, or they were entrapped and destroyed that way. But we'll see he uses the word again later to translate a obviously different word, trying to give over more the overall meaning than a precise translation, as you could already see from the first word. He doesn't say you shall not, he says you did, right? Because that's what the prophet means. You shouldn't have done it, and you did it. So he says, Biyom Tevire, on the day of his breaking. Literally, here I wrote destruction, but Tevir is related to the Hebrew root shavar. This taf would be exchanged for the letter shin. In many words, the shin in Hebrew and the taf in Aramaic interchange. So shavar, to break, becomes tavar in Aramaic, which means the same thing. On the day he was broken. V'dachadita livnei Yehuda, and you shall not rejoice. He says, and that you did rejoice over the children of Judah. Again, biyom tivir hon, on the day of their breaking. Again, destruction. Ude asgeta lemalala rav revan be'idan aka. So asgeta is from the root sagi in Aramaic. Sagi means like large. So that's similar to the Hebrew gadol, right? Asgeta, you enlarged. It doesn't say your mouth like it says in the Hebrew, you enlarged your mouth. You enlarged lemalala. Lemalala in Aramaic means to speak. You enlarged something. Lemalala, to speak. Rav Revan. Rav Revan means something high, great, mighty, haughty, right? So what did I translate here? You made yourself haughty. So that's the asgeta. You enlarged. What did you enlarge? You enlarged yourself. Lemalala, to speak Rav Revan, like high and mighty words. So I translated this as you made yourself haughty to speak haughtily, be'idan aka, at a time of distress. What was the Hebrew for that? Yom biyom tzara, again, a time of distress. So that, but again, I think the main point I wanted to bring from the Targum is that he puts it in the accusatory, not that you shall not, implying you shouldn't have, but you did. But he says it directly. You did do this. This is what you did. Okay. Here is a digest of some of the commentaries. You shall not see on the day of your brother. Regarding the first temple destruction, the Edomites stood by and watched, right? On the day of his estrangement, they were exiled. Okay, we went over that. There's another interpretation here that the day of his estrangement is that Edom is the brother of Jacob. Edom is descended from Esau. Esau is the brother of Jacob. They should have treated them like brothers, but instead of a brotherly relationship, there was an estrangement. The treatment of Edom towards Israel was like one of a stranger. So it's Edom who estranged Jacob. That's the day of his estrangement, from being his brother. Do not rejoice over the children of Judah on the day of their destruction. So not only should they not have looked, they should not have rejoiced, but they did. Do not open your mouth. They not only rejoiced, they verbally encouraged the destruction, like we saw in Psalms 137:7. Okay, I made all these slides just to remind me what I was planning to say, but thank God I remembered. So now we're up to verse 13. Before we proceed with verse 13, any questions or comments on what we've said until now? Tom says on Savaria, it's calamity, destruction, misfortune. Which word is calamity, destruction, misfortune, if you could specify? I am Daniel says Shema. I'm not sure I understand your comment. Linda Hill, Shalom, sorry late. I have a class that starts at 8:30. I'll watch later the beginning. No problem. We are happy to have you even momentarily. Okay. I'm going to go on to verse 13. Please interrupt if you have something to say. Here in verse 13, it says as follows. Al tavo v'sha'ar ami b'yom Edom al teire gam ato b'ra'aso b'yom Edo ve'al tishlachno v'chelo b'yom Edo. There's some interesting words here. Al tavo v'sha'ar ami, do not come into the gate of my people, biyom Edom, on the day of their aid. Okay, now here I wrote on the day designated for their retribution. More or less, all the commentaries translate aid as some type of destruction, which is accurate. Which is accurate. However, the reason I said day designated, and I could be wrong, is people may be familiar with in the Arabic, an Eid is like a holiday, right? Anyone feel like Eid Mubarak? You ever hear this? Right? If you're familiar with this, go ahead and comment. But so, and there's a section. Sorry, I hit the mic. There's a section of the Mishnah. I mentioned the Mishnah before, the oral law, that deals with, it's called Avodah Zarah. The section is called Tractate Avodah Zarah, which literally means idolatry. It's the tractate that deals with the laws of Jews vis-a-vis idolatry and idolaters. And it begins with a section that talks about the aid of the non-Jews. And there, the aid of the non-Jews refers to their holidays. And it's this word, Aleph Yud Dalet, okay? So in the Hebrew oral law, the word aid, Aleph Yud Dalet, is used to refer to the holidays of the non-Jews. And there's certain restrictions. When non-Jews means idolaters here. There's certain restrictions that Jews have in their interactions with non-Jews during their idolatrous holiday seasons, because we don't want to in any way be participatory in idolatry. So we need to limit our interactions with them, and the details of those laws are elaborated there. But their holidays are called Edom. So the first chapter is called Lifnei Edom, prior to their holiday. And Eid means holiday, just like it does in Arabic. The way I don't know Arabic, but I hear, people talk about Eid this and Eid that. And yet, every context that I'm familiar with where it occurs in the Tanakh, it refers to a time of destruction. So ironically, Eid, which is used to refer to a holiday of idolaters or non-Jews, for a Jew is a day of destruction. And if you look at the commentaries on the Mishnah, where it mentions the day of their Eid, it says it's using the word kind of ironically as a pejorative, to call their holidays days of destruction. The days where the idolaters worship their idolatry are just days that are extremely negative in nature from our perspective, and so the word aid is used. So I kind of tried to blend those two meanings here. It's a designated day, like a holiday, but it has the connotation of designated for something bad. Okay, designated for retribution. So it says, do not come into the gate of my people on the day of their retribution, and the day of their comeuppance. Altere, do not see. Gam ata, also you do not see. Bira'aso, in their evil. Biyom edo, on the day of their retribution, comeuppance. Their evil means the evil that befalls them. You should also not see it. So again, I heard it already before not to see it. It says also you don't see it again. Okay. And it says don't come into their gates. We didn't hear about coming into their gates before. Va'al tishlachna v'chelo, and do not shalach, from the root shalach, tishlachna, from the word shalach, meaning to send. Do not send bechelo. There's chel again. Do not send to their chel. It means do not send against their chel. And we discussed last week, chel means a group or gathering or mass of something. It could refer to people, and it could refer to possessions, and it could refer to attributes, as we discussed in the beginning of this class. So do not send against their chel. I wrote in the translation here, do not send your hand toward or against his masses. And I didn't identify masses of what, because again, some of the commentaries will say possessions, but we'll be able to also see that it could mean people. Biyomedo, again, on the day of their retribution. So again, we had three things in the last verse. Don't look, don't rejoice, don't open your mouth. Here it's don't come into the gate, also don't look, and don't send your hand against their chel. So what is that all about? Any questions about this translation before I go on? Okay, so in the comments here, Tom said, Nochro is the word that Safari translated as calamity, destruction, or misfortune. So again, that is according to some of the commentaries. I preferred the translation of those commentaries that related it to the word nechar, meaning foreign, because I felt it fit the context better, and it gave more of a nuance to what's going on as far as what our larger discussion that we've been having. Aid. Yeah, that's the word I'm talking about. Right? Some at my work have holidays they're referred to as Eid. Exactly. T. Bishop says there are several called Eid. Eid al-Adha is the one I know. It's coming up. So I made comments about that already. So do with that what you will. So let's move on a little bit. Here,
Rabbi,
Targum.
sorry, this verse 13, is that trying to say that the calamities that are befalling and have befallen Israel are somehow their retribution, their comeuppance?
Oh, certainly. The destruction of the first temple and second temple was not for naught. Remember that the prophets were warning the Jews for centuries to repent, or they would face a destruction, and eventually they ran out of chances. And even during the Second Temple period, especially if you were in the Shir Hashirim class, the Second Temple period is covered in Shir Hashirim as well. And the destruction of the Talmud says, and again, it's all based on scripture, but the Talmud synopsizes and sums up the two destructions as follows. The first temple was destroyed for the sins of idolatry, murder, and sexual immorality. Those were three cardinal sins that were committed during the first temple period. And for that, the temple was destroyed. The second temple, it says the people were all righteous and following God's laws. Why was it destroyed? It says it was destroyed because of Sinat Chinam, because of baseless hatred from one Jew to another. The Jews were factioning and fracturing. There was a tremendous amount of infighting and hatred of one group to the other. It was for that sin that the second temple was destroyed. And I'm sorry to say, we Jews remain in exile today as a result of this sin from which we have not recovered. And I caution any Jew listening to me to run and duck for cover when you see Jews throwing epithets and accusations and calumny and negativity upon other Jews. Run and duck for cover, because those are nuclear bombs that are very destructive to the fabric of our people. And as you can see, if you look around, especially on social media, we have not recovered from this. So to our great shame. Now, do you have a follow-up question to that? Because I feel like there's a follow-up question coming.
No, not really. But you answered it anyway, because I was thinking what currently relates to that, but you've covered it.
Yeah, so usually what follows that is, well, if God decreed their destruction, what guilt do the enemies of the Jews have for carrying out God's will? And this is a huge philosophical debate among the commentaries, but I'll tell you two primary approaches. One is the approach of Maimonides, who said, even though, for example, where does this come up? If you want to see this discussion in full relief, look at the commentary of Ramban, Nachmanides, to Genesis chapter 15, verses like 14 and 15, which is the covenant, what's known as the covenant between the parts, the Brit Bein HaBitarim, where God tells Abraham to take animals and slaughter them and cut them in half, and God's presence, as it were, his fire, passes through the parts. He makes this covenant with Abraham, and he says at that time, you shall surely know that your children will be strangers in a strange land for 400 years, and they'll be enslaved, and so on and so forth. So Maimonides says, if God decreed their enslavement, so how could the Egyptians be guilty of enslaving them? It seems to be it's a divine decree. So he says that even if God decreed it as a general historical occurrence, every individual, no individual was forced to participate. And every individual who utilized his free will to partake in that evil is guilty, is guilty. God has his ways of bringing something about. You don't have to choose to be the one to do it when it is something that a person shouldn't do. Nachmanides takes a very opposite approach where he says, no, once it's a decree from God, then one fulfills a positive commandment or precept in fulfilling it. Even if God would decree that someone should die, if you pick up a gun and shoot them, you have carried out God's will. And that is a positive act, he says. He says the guilt on the Egyptians, and by extension, he extends it to all the persecutors of the Jews, is that they did not do it. He says two reasons for their guilt. They did not do it with the intent to fulfill God's will. Had they heard this prophecy from a prophet of God and said, aha, it's the will of God, it's a decree of God, I will carry it out, that would have allayed the guilt because they would have gone as an emissary of God, but that's not what they did. They went and did it for their own selfish purposes. And this relates a lot to what we're seeing today with nations that are both antagonistic to Israel and protagonistic on behalf of Israel. If you're America first and everything you do to support Israel is America first, I'm sorry to say, but you will not be credited as fulfilling God's will when you come to the aid of Israel. Because it's not Israel first. It's not, and I'm not saying this is everyone. If you listen to a lot of the conservative political body in America, many of them are devout Christians who say we must stand with Israel because they are God's people. And we need to bless Israel so we'll be blessed. And, you have Elise Stefanik saying, I believe that Israel has a divine right to the land of Israel, etc., etc. That's great. That is perfect. That is amazing. But when someone says we're doing it because it's in the interest of the United States of America, and that's the exclusive intent, then that will not be a mitzvah, because you're doing it for yourself. And as a matter of fact, I knew I was going to bring this up at some point. I didn't plan per se to talk about it tonight, but there's a Talmudic passage in the beginning of Tractate Avodah Zarah. Remember I mentioned Tractate Avodah Zarah? So the Mishnah talks about the laws of idolatry, Jews vis-a-vis non-Jews. But in the Talmud, where it expands upon the Mishnah with a much more detailed discussion, it tells a story of the end of days and this, by the way, if we talked about the book of Joel and the valley of Jehoshaphat, this is what's going to go on in the valley of Jehoshaphat. And again, it could all be allegorical, but this is the idea. God, what's Jehoshaphat? We said is God will judge. There'll be a judgment upon the nations in the end of days. And God will judge the nations for their persecutions of the Jewish people and all the crimes they're guilty of. And one of the things that the nations will come forward and call in their defense is all the benefits they conferred upon the Jewish people. And then it says that Rome will come forward, Rome will come forward and say, what do you mean? We civilized the world. We brought architecture and, aqueducts and roadways, paved roads and bathhouses and sophisticated marketplaces and commerce, and all these things benefited the Jewish people. The roads benefited them, the bridges benefited them, the aqueducts, the bathhouses, the hygiene and the the commerce, all that benefited the Jewish people. Didn't we bring so much benefit upon the Jewish people? We were great to the Jews. What are you talking about? We were great to the Jews. And even if we weren't so great to the Jews, but certainly there were things we did that were great. Wasn't it great? It's the greatest. The greatest. Didn't we do just the greatest thing for the Jewish people? Some great things? Don't we deserve some credit for that? Some reward? And God says, fools, everything you did for yourselves. You all did it for yourselves. Did the Jews benefit from it? Yeah, but that wasn't your intention. You did it for yourselves. So I don't want to hear that you want to get reward for you conferring benefits upon the Jewish people. That was not your intent. If it's not your intent, I'm sorry, you don't get the credit. And the same way that when the non-Jews, so to speak, punish the Jewish people or bring about punishment, calamity, retribution upon the Jewish people, but they do it for their own sadistic intentions, then they are guilty. That's what Ramban says. Number one, that's charge number one against the nations. Charge number two against the nations, he says, is that any of God's decree against the Jewish people, there's a limit to it. He says, in the verses that talk about the Jewish destruction, they're somewhat elastic, meaning you don't have to take a maximalistic interpretation of such dire and cruel and devastating destruction. A little bit of destruction, and you could fulfill with a light slap. You could fulfill God's decree of calamity against the Jews. He says, but the non-Jewish nations went so far. They went so much further than anything the prophets ever declared against the Jewish people. He said it was so cruel. They went beyond God's decree. And number one, going beyond God's decree of cruelty against the Jews, and for doing it without the proper intentions, they are fully guilty for all of the suffering that they caused the Jewish people, and they will be fully visited with retribution for it. So I thought that was your follow-up question of, it says retribution. So does that mean that this sort of deserved by the Jewish people? Something was deserved, but to the degree and with the intent that the nations brought suffering upon the Jewish people, nah. That's all on them. That's the Ramban's approach. Again, Maimonides would say they shouldn't have done anything. God has his ways. He'll make it happen. But each individual has to say, I'll have no part in it. That's not for me. So those are two of the classic approaches to the question of how do the enemies of the Jews face retribution for carrying out a divine decree. Okay, so I hope you all hear the question. I hope you all hear the approaches and the answer. Any questions, comments before we continue? We have seekers of righteousness, but aren't rabbis supposed to call out heretical Jews like Jews for Jesus? Yes, you're correct. In other words, what I said, there's a limiting principle. There is a limiting principle. There's a limiting principle to how far I need to go to be peaceful and friendly towards, so to speak, a fellow Jew who is being improper. There is a limit, and there is a point where we do come out publicly. The question is, whose job is it to do it? Who is the one who's meant to be the recipient of that? And what exactly are we meant to do to them? And there are very specific circumstances and rules that guide that. And I'm sorry, but we've gone way out of line. And there are people who just they just get off on a power trip by making themselves so big and important to get up and call out every person they don't agree with as a heretic and as bad and terrible, and only I'm good, and only you should listen to me, and I'm the only kosher rabbi, and everybody else is terrible, awful, heretic. And my view on what I see, especially on social media, which is not the place where you're going to see the sages of Israel making such statements, if you will ever see them make such statements, which is exceedingly rare. Why am I hearing it from, I don't want to say his name, Why am I hearing it from this fellow over here, but I'm not hearing it from this great rabbi over there, right? Why does I have to hear it from you on your YouTube channel, but we're not hearing it coming out of the yeshivas. We're not hearing it coming from the Rush yeshivas, the great leaders of the Torah academies, the great postkei ador, the great halachic authorities of the generation. I don't hear them talking this way. I never hear them talking this way. These people talk with an exceeding amount of love, an exceeding, excessive, overflowing degree of love for all life. I'll tell you a story. The story is, there's an amazing, amazing speech. If you could find the recording, it's on YouTube, of Rabbi Mordechai Gifter of blessed memory, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Rabbi Mordechai Gifter spoke at a symposium on Orthodox Judaism, probably in, I don't remember if it was somewhere, Cleveland maybe, where he had a yeshiva. He was the head, he was a Rosh Yeshiva, he was the dean of the yeshiva of Telz. It was the yeshiva, it was known as the yeshiva of Telz. Now, Rabbi Mordechai Gifter speaks there publicly about what Torah learning was like in Eastern Europe, because in his day, the Torah, this was prior to World War II. He's speaking after World War II, but he grew up as a young person prior to World War II. The major centers of Torah learning were in Eastern Europe. And boys from America, instead of traveling to Israel like they do today to go to these major centers of Torah learning, they went to Eastern Europe. They went to Lithuania. Or he says Lithuania. So they go to Lithuania, and they go to the great academies of learning like the Telz Yeshiva, which was in Telz, in the city of Telz in Lithuania. And these yeshivas were destroyed. So there's Telz in Israel, and there's Telz in the United States now. These are sort of the yeshivas that carry on the legacy of the original in Eastern Europe. And he tells just amazing, amazing details about the way Torah was in Eastern Europe. Phenomenal. But among the many anecdotes that he gives, he says that in Israel today, now he's not alive anymore, but already at the time he was speaking, one of the greatest sages of our time, who's no longer alive, he passed away around 2000, was Rabbi Shach, Rav Shach. His name was Rav Shach. Rav Shach was the head of the yeshiva of Panovich, which again was named for the town of Panovich in Eastern Europe, which was destroyed. The yeshiva moved to Israel, and now the yeshiva of Panovich is in the Israeli city of Bnei Brak. In Bnei Brak is a great yeshiva of Panovich, one of the biggest yeshivas in the world. The head of that yeshiva at the time was Rav Shach, okay? Rav Shach was known to be a fiery person, a firebrand of a person. And he was the one who was most likely to go call out someone he didn't like the way he was behaving. He's the one who would call them out publicly. He was big enough to do that. So because of that, he was known to be somewhat of a they call in Hebrew a Baal Machlokes, a person of strife and controversy, because he was the one who would get up and say things that nobody wanted to hear, that were a little challenging, and criticize elements within the community. So I had a Rebbe, Rav Beryl Wine, who's still alive, he should be well, who said he visited Rav Shach, and Rav Shach said to him, "What do they say about me in the United States of America?" And Rabbi Wine didn't want to answer him because maybe some people speak negatively of him because of how fiery he was. It was a little too hard on the sensibility of us soft Americans. So he didn't want to answer him. And Rav Shach said, "I tell you what they say. They say about me that I'm a Baal Machlokes, that I'm a person of controversy and strife." And Rabbi Wine, sheepishly didn't want to confirm, didn't want to argue, sheepishly kind of shrugged, nodded like, okay, maybe. And Rav Shach says, "You know why I do it?" He says, nobody else is going to do it. Somebody has to do it. Somebody has to do it. And that means it's against my nature. I'm really a soft person. I'm really a loving person, but someone has to call out the cracks, you know? Now that's a prelude. I'm going back to Rav Gifter. So Rav Gifter has a story. He said he was friends with, I don't remember if it was the rabbi of the Reform congregation or the rabbi of the conservative congregation in his city. He said he was friends with him. And that person was going to take a trip to the land of, I think, conservative. The person was going to go to the land of Israel. Now, as far as Orthodox Judaism is concerned, conservative Judaism is heresy. It is. I'm not going to go into it, but it's heresy. So technically speaking, are every conservative Jew heretics? You would think the answer is yes, but the truth is the answer is no. The answer is a conservative Jew in 2025 does not know his right from his left. He doesn't know what the Torah says. He doesn't know what the sages taught. How's he supposed to know right and wrong? He's not a heretic. He's just ignorant. And such a person we have nothing but mercy and compassion for. And to a certain degree, we could even say that about their rabbinate. An 8th grader in an Orthodox day school yeshiva knows more than your average conservative rabbi. Sad, but true. So here you have Rav Gifter talking about how he's friends with the conservative rabbi. How could you be friends with a conservative rabbi? He's a heretic. You should call him out. You put out a fatwa on him, right? No. He's friends with the conservative rabbi. The conservative rabbi tells him, I'm going to travel to the land of Israel. So Rav Gifter says, oh, you're going to the land of Israel? I have a friend there. I have a friend in the land of Israel. Can you bring him a letter? Can you bring him a letter? So he says, sure, I'll bring him a letter. So he writes him a letter and he gives it to him and he gives him the address. Now, the address he gave him was Rav Shach's address. This is the Torah Johnny of the generation, who is the leader of the ultra-Orthodox Jews. He is the leader of I could tell you more about how he was considered the absolute final word leader of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, who everybody vilifies and makes them out to be crazy, mean, unfriendly, unkind fanatics, which is all just a false media spin, okay? And I'll get to the punchline. So this rabbi goes on his trip and he comes back. And Rabbi Gifter says, what happened? He said, did you deliver my letter? He says, yeah, I delivered the letter. And he looks like visibly shaken. He says, what happened? What happened? He says, well, I went to this person's house and I knocked on the door. And this rabbi came to the door and he said, who are you? And I said, I'm a friend of Rabbi Mordechai Gifter. And he looked at me and he said, he looked at me and there was fire in his eyes. It was the fire of love. There was a fire of love burning in his eyes. And he looked at me with this fire and he embraced me and he brought me into his house. And he said, please have a seat. And I sat him down and he sat me down and he said, have something to eat. And he brought me a piece of kugel. And I wanted to eat the kugel, but before I could eat the kugel, he says to me, "Nu, macha broche." Right? In Yiddish, it means, nu is like, come on, make a bracha, say a blessing before you eat. Now, this conservative rabbi doesn't say blessings before he eats. Only Orthodox Jews make blessings before they eat. But he says to him, "Nu, macha bracha." He said, what could I do? I had to make a bracha. So I made a bracha and I ate the kugel, and then he brought me a drink. And he said to me, "Nu, macha bracha." So what could I do? I had to make a bracha. I made a bracha and I had a drink. He said, but the whole time the man treated me with nothing but love. I never felt more love from a human being in my life. This person was alight. He was on fire with love of his fellow Jew from the beginning to the end of my visit. And he says to the rabbi, he says, who was that rabbi? He says to Rabbi Gifter, who was that man? Who was he? And Rabbi Gifter says to him, my friend, that man was the king of the fanatics. And his friend, the conservative rabbi, says, "No, it can't be." And he said, "Yes, and I am one of his fanatics." He said, "No, it can't be." He said, "Yes, it is so." And the point I'm making is that the Torah properly seated in the heart of a Jew makes him full of love for his fellow Jew and full of love for his fellow man. And the Orthodox community, and especially the ultra-Orthodox community, get a very bad rap. They get a very bad rap. But what this man experienced with his own self, totally unexpected, a non-Orthodox Jew, was that he was embraced with more love from this most fanatic of the fanatic Orthodox Jews on planet Earth than anyone else, and he couldn't believe the experience. But that's a true Torah giant. That's who the Torah giants are. They speak truth and they speak love, and those are the messages they have for a conservative rabbi. Meanwhile, you have guys coming along and shouting vitriol at other rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, their fellow Jews, and even the non-Orthodox, who we have nothing but compassion for, because halacha, Jewish law, regards them as tinok shenishba. Tinok shenishba means a baby who was kidnapped. We have in our history, sadly, incidents where Christians kidnapped Jewish babies and raised them as Christians. And when those Jews were eventually reconnected with their community, they were not treated as apostates. They were not treated as heretics. They were treated as what's called tinok shenishba, a kidnapped baby, which means they're completely not responsible for their life choices in believing things and acting in a way that's contrary to the Torah. They bear zero guilt. And that's the state of Jewry today. The state of Jewry today is that our fellow Jews who are not living and believing in conformity with the Torah bear zero guilt for that, because they were raised in a completely secular society where they cannot be expected to know better. And it's our job to teach them. And it's our job to reach out to them. And it's our job to embrace them. And how are we supposed to affect and how are we supposed to improve the spiritual state of our people when all we do is say terrible things about them? I'm not saying that's all we do. It's not all we do. But we have people getting up, calling themselves rabbis and behaving this way. Behaving in a very distasteful way. And you know who are the people who gather around them? Look at the people who attach themselves to these people. These people are mentally unwell. These people are mentally unstable. These people have serious emotional issues. They're all unstable. This should be representative of Judaism? 100% not. Run away. So you're asking me, shouldn't rabbis call out? There are certain people who are big enough to do it. They know who are the right people to do it to and who are not the right people to do, and they knew the correct way to do it. Look to the great authorities of Torah. Look to the great heads of the yeshivot, the Torah academies. Don't look to YouTube talking heads. Okay. And I'm a talking head. Look at me. Look at me. I'm literally a talking head. But again, I'm gonna tell you, I know my place. Okay. I look to the great rabbis for guidance of how to live and what to say. And I'm a small guy. I'm chopped liver. Okay. But I'm trying to convey something that's greater than me and above me and has come down to me from my great teachers, that's come to them from their great teachers. Okay. And we don't have any more time now. And I could talk more about who I'm not here to promote myself. And I tell people all the time, why should you listen to me? There's no reason whatsoever to listen to me. But if someone else is saying something and you want to hear another view, so here's another view, put them side by side and you choose. At least you have an alternative. I want to make available an alternative viewpoint to some of the poison that is being broadcast in the name of Torah. Very, very sadly. Okay? So you choose. Nobody has to listen to me. I don't tell anybody what to do. I'm telling you the way I see it. You can compare and you can choose. Okay? So I spoke too much on this, but that's it. That's all I can say. I have to now. It's late, so sorry for going on a rant. You choose. You choose. It's for you to choose. It's not for me to tell you what to do. This is how I see it. This is how I feel. This is how I've been taught. This is how I've been guided. This is what message I receive from the Torah, and do with it what you choose to do. Live your life. Live your life. Okay? Fine. I gotta go. It's late. I can't take any more comments because it's too late. I have to go. But
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
we'll get back to verse whatever we're up to, 13. We'll get back to it. But thank you all for attending. We'll meet again. Tuesday night is the Genesis class, and then we'll meet again after Passover. Okay, so everyone have a happy Passover, and I appreciate you all coming and studying with me.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Rabbi.
Happy Passover.
Thanks. Yes, happy Passover.
Happy Passover. Good night, everybody.
Night.